Me and my mother were driving through our small town in Southwest Virginia. My mother and father are divorced, and he lived in Tennessee, which is relevant to a story that I've posted before, not necessarily to this one. Anyways, they had very different viewpoints on helping out hitchhikers, as my dad was very much into hiking, camping, and many more. But there was a woman walking down the road. Mind you, it's very hot outside. It's the summertime, and I noticed she was carrying a child swaddled up in a blanket, which struck me as a poor choice considering it was the middle of summer. Just seems too warm for a swaddle. So I said to my mom, "We really need to pick that woman up. Surely she isn't far from where she needs to go, but she has a baby." And, to my surprise, my mom pulls into the gas station parking lot, tells me to go in and get a large bottle of water, and we will ask her if she would like a ride. So we pull out of the gas station and approach the thin, almost sickly looking woman, and she very quietly just grabbed the door handle and got inside, not saying anything at all, not even a thank you, which really didn't sit right with me, because this is the South. Everyone is friendly and approachable. Well, for the most part. So we ask where she's needing to go, and me being in the passenger seat, I turn to look at her, and she's looking down at her baby and cooing at it. She replies, without ever looking up from the swaddled being, "About 2 miles past the Dollar General on Jeb Stuart." We were very close to that area. I decided to turn and speak to the woman and maybe get a conversation going, but as I get a better look at her baby, it actually was a drywall hammer wrapped up in a blanket inside another blanket. I froze. It was like I walked into a deep freezer. I told my mom that I really think we should stop because I hear what sounds like knocking and was very adamant. We needed to stop at the upcoming Dollar General. As we pull in, I told my mom to get out of the car, that I needed her help locating the noise. And we met each other at the hood of the car, where I told her, "Mom, that's not a baby. She has a hammer in that blanket." To which my mother advised me that we should walk inside to see if they had anything to help us close that up. And we told the woman we would be right back. We walked inside and told them to call the police so that they could help this woman and that we could no longer have her in our vehicle, and we also explained why. My mom gave her some vague reason as to why we couldn't take her further, and she got out of the vehicle very angrily, but almost confused, and we left her in the parking lot. She very well could have just been a really confused woman, maybe with some mental issues. I don't know what was going on with her, but I do know that I don't think she had good intentions for us. So, to the lady with a drywall hammer, let's not meet again.
Back in 2011, I was 21 years old, fresh out of university, and living in the capital of the Philippines, Manila, for some months. I interned at a peace-building NGO, while also playing semi-professional football, soccer, in the country's national league. A strange combo, but both roles are relevant to the story. My experience starts one rainy Saturday afternoon in November. Football was canceled with a waterlogged pitch, but already downtown on my way to training, I decided to visit a fruit market listed on my Lovely Planet guide. This was pre-ambiguous Google Maps days, at least in Manila. I must have looked lost, as 2 Filipino women, one middle-aged and one in her early 20s, approached me from behind, raising their umbrella over my head and asking where I was headed. After some friendly chit-chat, it came to pass, without my prompting, that they had lived in the same neighborhood that I'm from in London, England. A strange coincidence, and one that lowered my guard. They offered to take me to a better fruit market, one that required a taxi to reach. Naive, trusting and nervous about offending, I got in a taxi, leading me through the winding, maze-like back streets of the Manila slum. We exited, and I'm utterly lost in an unfamiliar part of this sprawling city. Remember, this is pre-Google Maps and ride-sharing apps, leaving me at the mercy of these women. With no fruit market in sight, they plead with me to come into their nondescript, low-rise home for food and drink. My youthful naivety and reluctance to offend once again get the better of me. Whether due to trauma or time, I really can't remember what inside of this place looked like, but I do remember that it was dingy, had a TV with a karaoke hookup, and there was a man waiting when we arrived. Realizing what a sketchy situation I was in, I was conscious of anything that they gave me to drink, watching them open the beer bottles in front of me. A couple of drinks in, the karaoke was flowing. I felt physically fine, but deeply uncomfortable, vulnerable, and trapped, and was waiting for the opportunity to leave. A tray of barbecue meat was brought out, always associating drugging with drink and not food. I had very little concern over eating it. The naivety of this would become instantly apparent. Putting this pork into my mouth, it had a strange medicinal flavor, but it would be too late before I connected the dots. My final memory of the day was when the younger woman, uncomfortably close to me, holding a microphone and flirtatiously singing the chorus to Hey Jude by the Beatles. Na 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 Hey Jude. While I drifted off, unable to keep my eyes open. I have virtually no memory of the next 24 hours of my life. I would wake up in a darkened room in the middle of the night, 1,000 kilometers south of Manila, in a city called Davao. To be clear, this Davao trip was one that I had previously scheduled for work, leaving the day after this incident. Still to this day, all I remember of the journey was waking up and seconds of sitting in a taxi on my way to the airport. I passed through customs, boarded a plane, collected my baggage, met my colleagues, and was driven to our work office apartment, all with zero memory of doing any of this. My colleagues didn't suspect anything was wrong with me, mentioning later that I just seemed tired. It took some hours after waking up to piece together where I was and what had occurred. $200 had been withdrawn from my bank account, but I still had my wallet and my phone. While I can't be certain, I concluded that I had been fed a popular drug in the Philippines called Ativan. I read similar stories of people being spiked, functioning relatively normally, becoming pliable, but not having any memory of the incident. This would explain how I withdrew $200 while seemingly unconscious. To this day, I feel deeply uncomfortable at what may have occurred after I passed out, particularly with the behavior of the younger woman towards me just before I passed out. But those 24 hours of my life are gone, and I'll never know what happened. To the two women in Manila who drugged and robbed me, let's not meet.
This is a convoluted story, so bear with me as I try to convey everything that I can recall about what led me to the conclusion that my ex-housemate could have potentially been a serial killer or a serial killer in the making. It was the summer of 2015 when I moved in, and at first appearances, my housemate/landlord Mike was somewhat normal, if not a bit socially awkward and dysfunctional. When I was signing the papers, he was adamant that I should never go into the basement, which I thought was odd, but I really needed a place to stay, and well, people have their little quirks, so I just chalked it up to that at that time. As I got to know Mike and our cohabitation continued, I learned more about the depths of his dysfunction. Firstly, that he used meth. Now, I don't automatically judge people based on vices, but I was surprised at the extent of his use. He was probably the first person I knew who used meth and balanced a full-time job, and enjoyed a decent amount of success. The reason this is important to the story is that when he would be around the house, drinking and using meth, he would start to run off at the mouth. He would often joke that if I smelled lye coming from the basement, not to think anything of it. I think it was probably the third time he said this that I asked why he keeps saying that, and he said, "I use chemicals to clean up after the bodies," with a wily grin on his face. I tried to chalk that up to a bad sense of humor, but it didn't sit right with me. He was also very particular that I let him know of my coming and going and my work schedule. I remember him being shocked and uncomfortable one day that I ended up taking off of work because he didn't realize that I was home. I remember that day because there was a lot of clanging and what sounded like muffled shouting coming from the basement. His car was in the driveway, but he was not in the main house or his bedroom. Other days, he would play very loud music that bumped through the whole house. Sometimes, he would even play NPR talk radio at those volumes. In retrospect, I think he may have been trying to mask sounds. He would make remarks about sex workers, saying, "You can do whatever you want. You can choke them or beat them to death, and nobody cares." I took exception to this, and I told him that I thought that was messed up. But when he would get tweaking, he'd always come back around to alluding to the same kind of violence, talking about how he was a normal white guy who owned a house and had a good career, so the police would never suspect him. At this point, I start to think that it's gone too far to simply be a joke. I was in a weird position because money was tight at that time and my options were few. I tried to convince myself that even if he is messed up, he is probably just engaging in outward fantasism. I knew that he would acquire the services of sex workers on occasion, but again, did not judge that activity at face value, but started becoming concerned. Then, at one point when I was doing laundry, I caught whiffs of decomposition. The house we were in was in southeast Portland. It was relatively new. Having grown up in upstate New York, I knew that animals can be trapped in walls and die. But this was the garage, and there were no animals scurrying in the walls. This was strange and telling to me. I considered carefully what I would do, and decided I would confront him about the smell. I decided to pose the question in a somewhat suggestive way by expanding one of his jokes. I told him that he needs to do a better job cleaning up the bodies because I smell decomposition from the garage. And I will never forget his reaction. His eyes widened and he shot me a sharp glare, somewhere between fear and anger, and he stumbled over his words and eventually responded, "What? Really?" I said, "Yes, really." And there was a few seconds of awkwardness before he said, "Oh, thanks for letting me know," and promptly went into his bedroom and shut the door. A few days after that, he went into the upper crawl space in the garage while I was again doing laundry. He called for me and was trying to convince me to come up into the crawl space. My body locked up, and it was like my instincts were screaming at me that if I went up there, I would not come back down. I gave some excuse that I can sparsely remember and that I had to be someplace. I packed up my laundry, threw it in the room, and left. He spent a lot of time in the padlocked basement without a doorknob, and the only way in was through the backyard. I wish I would have gone down there in retrospect, to either confirm or dismiss the suspicions once and for all. In the last couple months that I have lived there, I was privy to more graphic comments about women and sex workers, explicit talk of sexual violence, and he was using more and more. He once showed me a video he made. He's a graphic designer and artist as well, which featured heavy bondage themes, interspersed with distorted audio of women screaming and the strange leering figure in a plague doctor costume. It was one of those situations where any one of these things alone may be innocuous, but as they accumulated, it became suspicious to me. It was October of 2016 that I left there, taking off to the Ochedio camp during the anti-pipeline protest with Standing Rock, Lakota. A mix of feeling called to action and having nothing to lose, as I wanted to get out of those house in the worst way. My last night there, I did not give a notice that I was leaving. He was drinking and tweaking again, started in on the same conversation, loosely describing murder and sexual violence in the tone of some sort of edgy joke. I told him he would be caught eventually, not even holding back my suspicion anymore, and he reiterated that he was the last person police would suspect and asserted that they wouldn't catch him. He said this in a very serious and concise way, dropping the pretense he had been using before. And I left the next morning. This haunted me for months, then a year and a half. I felt as though I hadn't done anything, and the guilt was eating away at me. So I called Portland Crime Stoppers and put in an anonymous tip describing what I had described here. When I did, the operator started going back and forth, putting me on hold because the call had piqued the interest of the police sergeant who was assigned to the call center. So they were asking me detailed questions about his vehicle, his house, the methods he described, and many more. It seemed like they took interest, and I gave them as much information as I could remember, and left it at that, feeling just a little better that I had at least tried to do something about it. Fast forward to recent times, I told my mother about all of this, and she became interested, asking what house this was, and she ended up pulling it up on Gmaps. She put up the street view, and I noticed that there was a large enclosed trailer in the driveway that wasn't there when I was. I could theorize why it might have been there, but can't put together a practical reason for it, or why he'd be using it, unless he was moving or using it to haul things to discard. Admittedly, that is pure conjecture, but I couldn't help but wonder. I doubt that I will get closure or have my suspicions validated unless he does finally get caught and arrested, and I read about it. I have grown up poor, and I have been around the lowlife a lot, and I have interacted with many sketchy and unsavory people in my time, but none of them have ever made the impression that Mike made on me. Make of it what you will, but I hope I never meet him again. Hi everybody, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for listening and watching the video. I really do hope that you enjoyed it. Anyway, if you want to send a story for me to read, or if you want to follow me on social media, my email and all the other links to my account are in the description of the video. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't yet to the channel. Once again, thanks for listening.